And we're back. This is part two. We were just talking about partnership blind spots, and something happened with the recording, and I
How
don't
about
know.
technology?
Technology is my friend, but what we were talking about is partnerships and what happens if we're not actually pointing out the blind spots that we may see, or if we're not open to having blind spots pointed out to us, and a lot of the problems with that. And one of the common causes I'm going to start talking about common causes that I've seen is lack of self-awareness. If I'm not really knowing myself very well, um, or I'm not really paying attention to my difficulties and where I struggle, then when somebody brings something to me, I'm going to disagree with it, and I'm going to get defensive, and that's going to be a difficult issue for me to deal with. And let me tell you, there's been times in my life that I have had difficulty hearing that I'm not operating the way that I think I am. And it takes a lot of humility to be able to see where the other person's talking. And so if you got self-awareness problems, then you may have some issues with being able to hear about blind spots you got. I'm going to ask you, Kevin, misaligned values. If your values aren't aligning, like we were talking about, transparency might be a value in the company. If they're not aligning, how can that cause problems with blind spots?
Well, I think ultimately the issue with that is you're playing by two different sets of rules in two different games, or the same set of rules, but you're playing two different games. Um, again, if let's say, put it like, we'll just do like an obvious example, right? Let's say both people identify as being good, right? They're good people, but one of them builds a business and the other robs banks. But they both define it as doing it for the good.
Right?
Well,
Because he's Robin Hood.
right. We'll say it's Robin. Yeah, sure. We'll say it's Robin, right? He's stealing from the rich, giving to the poor. But they both have their own way of getting it done, and they both claim that they're good. The issue you're going to run into is while they both say they're good, what is good? And that is relative to each person. So that's kind of an obvious example, but it can be much more complex in real life. As some people, like what's good business, right?
Mhm.
What good business is to some people is not to others, and it's not to say that one way is right and one way is wrong, right? The example I gave is obvious, just to illustrate the point, but it gets much more complex when one person wants to do things a certain way and the other wants to do things another way, and those ways don't coincide with one another, even if they're both right. You could have two very decent people, very good people, wanting to do things. It happens in dating too, right? You could have two good, two decent people that just don't share the same values. They just don't agree. Even if it's like, say, politically, right? One way is not necessarily good and one way is not necessarily bad, but it's different and they don't mix.
Right.
Together, it's bad.
Right.
That sort of idea.
And it's funny because the thing that's interesting about what you're talking about, and I don't know why we keep circling around values, but values really kind of play a role in everything we do. So maybe that's the reason. But having
Matters.
it does values
Blind
do
spots,
matter.
right?
And honestly, for me, it's really the behaviors that we're really looking at, because the word that the value is describing, or hold the label that the value might be, is really subjective of what it means, and we might work by each other's definition, we may not. But when we go, okay, so what does that look like in behavior? And that's one of the reasons when I work with people in creating uh, an understanding of what your values are for your company, and we talk about core values and aspirational values, where we want to go and grow to, what you need for permission to play values, and how are we going to actually invite people into the company. When we start looking at those values, we go, it's not about the word and what the word might mean, but it's really, how does that show up in the business, and what is that behavior? And the problem is if we have two different opinions on what that behavior looks like, or what that value might look like, we're misaligned, and we're going to have problems if we're not, one, self-aware, and two, not really talking about it. Another common cause of the blind spots and not talking about them a lot is undefined or not clear roles and responsibilities. I thought you were going to do it. Um, in fact, I thought you were going to talk about this one. Uh, and so
Exactly.
you had, when you started Precision with Tyler, you guys kind of had clearly identified roles, but like, you're doing this part and he's doing this part, but were the roles really clear, and what went into them, and what were the responsibilities of them?
Yeah, they definitely weren't as clear as they should be. Um, I think they were probably, 'cause, I mean, there's different levels to it too. I think they were clearer than most, but I think there was. Oh, well, actually, you know what? This is a good example of a blind spot I had, right? I put myself in a position, um, I put myself in a position to cause resentment within myself because I have a habit of treating myself like a martyr when I don't have to, right? And in doing so, and I didn't realize this was a blind spot of mine, and it wasn't even that Tyler wasn't even encouraging it, but I put myself there, and then I almost unconsciously blamed him for a decision he really didn't even make. But that's an example of a blind spot that I had, was being too sacrificial,
Yeah,
and
and
not being
actually,
fair.
I have a little talk called "From Cape to Cross," that I really talk about that, and we actually talked about how you end up doing that a lot of times, and it was a real eye opener for you. I remember when you're like, "Shoot, I'm doing it again," uh,
Mhm.
and the whole idea of Cape to Cross is, we want to go in and save the day. We want to save the day. We want to take care of it. We want to take one for the team. But if it's that blind spot that we have a habit of doing that, and nobody's asking us to, one, we start going, well, why isn't that guy doing it? And two, we get something out of it, and so we keep doing it, and then as we do it, we're like, I can't keep doing this anymore, and start getting mad, and we don't even know
Mhm.
why we're mad sometimes. And that's a very good example. And what was it doing with you and Tyler when that was happening?
It was creating a resentment in myself that I was taking on an unfair amount of risk, um, and I was expecting him to understand, but he didn't. But it was also not explained to him, so he didn't even realize what was going on. I was kind of ignoring what was going on. I was doing that, what you mentioned earlier, just kind of like doing it to myself. I feel like
Right,
self
right, right.
reflection, you're talking to others, but self reflection is really talking to yourself. I was almost ignoring myself and just allowing things to play out. And, it did come to a head, and it had to be talked about.
And I'll throw a good plug in for coaching, because Kevin actually put his hand up and said, "There's something going on here, and I'm getting really frustrated. But Tyler's not doing it, and I know that, but I don't know what's happening." And
Mhm.
when we started talking about what was happening, he started realizing that he was putting undue pressure on himself and throwing money in, and doing everything to save the day, and it wasn't working quite right, because he had he we in the world of Precision had to step back and go, okay, what does it really need instead of just more money and more time and more? What do we have to do? And that, I think that that was really one of the big turning points of starting to really understand how to communicate as a team and how to not take over and not blend responsibilities, because the responsibility that you were actually blending was financial backer as well as how to make the business run the right way. And so, and it's also funny enough, one of the biggest blind spots that I see people have in business in general is when they start having problems, they go look for money and they think money's going to solve it. And all they're going to do is, if they get money, is put money back into
Magnify it.
the big trash barrel in the middle of the business that's burning all the money. So
Yep.
we'll go get a loan and put it in the barrel, and then we're going to grow our debt.
Exactly. Right. And it's worth noting too, when, like Terry said, when I was feeling this kind of way, and it did come to a head, we talked about it, we worked through it, and I was able to explain to Tyler what was going on. Um, Tyler was like, he had no idea. And when he did have an idea, once he found out and realized what was going on, he's like, well, how can I help kind of thing. And ultimately, he ended up taking on financial risk as well. We changed his role to better help the business. And he turned out, and not all the stories have a happy ending like this,
That's
but
very
he
true.
turned out to be a much better partner than I had initially, uh, where my perspective was at the time. Right. So by me finally being able to communicate what was going on, um, it allowed him to be able to understand and allowed him to be able to help. Sometimes not communicating to the other person, you're taking away their ability to help you. And that was
Absolutely.
kind of, like I mentioned before, my blind spot was like that martyr mentality, that unnecessary martyr mentality. And so it's a good example, and you can have a happy ending. It would have
It's
been better had I gotten ahead of it. It definitely would have been better. Thankfully, we were able to, you know, pick up the pieces at that time and get it before it really became a problem.
and
But it's
so
much more ideal to get ahead.
I want to talk a little bit about that too, because as we go, we're going to talk about how to navigate that and really understand how to actually get ahead of it, or keep those. And we're not going to keep it from happening, but how can we find out when we're doing it faster?
Hmm.
Because the fact of the matter is um, that example was one of the best examples I've ever heard, because you didn't know it was a blind spot because it was a pattern that you have of wanting to help and want to go in and do what you can to be of service. At the same time, you didn't realize that it was creating the frustration. And the big thing when that starts happening and the other person isn't aware of it is our ego starts to play the role of the other person. And they start actually backing up and making excuses for not contributing. So we have to do the contribution more, and it's our own ego saying they don't want to, or they're too busy, or they're not as committed as me, and if they were, they'd be doing it. And we're just having a little conversation inside our head that we're not really aware of. And it may sound crazy. It's not crazy, it's thinking. However, the problem is that we all have that kind of crazy thinking, and we use assumptions and we use biases and we use our patterns to separate us and not have the conversation, instead of take action to have those conversations and saying, hey, I'm not liking what's going on here, and I don't think it's anybody's fault, but I need to talk about it. And so and that moves into, okay, let's navigate these difficult waters, so to speak. And so the first step that I always try to help people understand when they have partnerships is, we got to build awareness together, and we got to put our hand up and say, hey, these are the blind spots I see. What are your blind spots? And then be open to, hey, tell me, Kevin, what are my blind spots? What do you see me do over and over that is getting in the way? And how what do you see, Kevin, as ways that we can actually build awareness together more?
Well, I think a good way is um, being self-reflective yourself, being vulnerable. Because by being vulnerable yourself and outwardly vulnerable, make it known, it allows other people around you to also be vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, people are more transparent, which means you get more information, which means you can spot these blind spots better.
Yeah.
And by spotting them, that gives you an opportunity to, I mean, it's not always something like that you just solve per se, but it's something that,
Stumble
at
over
least,
again and again and again.
right. Like, the mentality I have of kind of being that martyr, it's still there, but at least I know about it. Gives me a chance to step
You know,
back
and
and say, is it fair?
I gotta say, for all those people who know a martyr, pay attention that it's not just the martyr, but oftentimes it's the person that wants to come in and help and have a big heart to help and want to have a big heart, but they're setting themselves up to be the martyr later. And so that's why I call it Cape to Cross, because it's like I want to be the superhero saving the day and I
Mhm.
want to take care of everything. But as I save the day, I start to take on stress and I start to take on all of the problems of that situation or the multiple situations thereafter where I'm the superhero and then I'm carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Now I'm the martyr on the cross. And so it's like, hey, how do we catch ourselves from doing that, and how do we go in and my strongest suggestion is put up your hand and say, hey, I got this tendency to want to be a superhero, and I also have a tendency to, when it gets too much for me, to blame other people, that I'm the only one doing it, and so please watch out for that for me. And I have one a blind spot that I didn't know about, and I still don't notice I do it. I'm noticing a little bit more, but I ask questions in the frame of statements a lot of times. And so I'll say something that I'm thinking is a question, but they hear it the way I put it as a statement. And then people think that I meant it as this is what we do. When I'm saying, is this what we should do? And so I had to learn how to actually go, this is a question, even though I'm stating it. And so, or I'll make a statement and I go, is that accurate or not? To make sure. But I didn't know I was doing that for a while. And I actually had me and Kevin have a mutual friend, Michael. I used to make statements like that when he was doing some of my marketing stuff, and he'd just take action on it. I'd be like, "Why did you do that?"
It's like it
Is
was a
that what you
question.
said to? And I was like, "No, that was a question."
That's a
And
good
so,
one.
understanding where our own blind spots are, and then the other thing that we had Kevin do and his team do is we had them do what we call a working genius assessment, and Kevin fell in love with it and has it for everybody now. But I think he has more assessments given out than I do, and I actually use the test for work. He just, hey, I want to find out how they're productive. Um,
Curiosity.
but yeah, and the thing about it is getting some assessments and getting some understanding of yourself through these assessments and understanding how you work and interact with people is a really good idea on how to build awareness about yourself, and then share that information in your team and be able to go, oh well, this is the way I am, how are you, and start to understand how that works together. And that's going to really build a lot of awareness for our blind spots, and really build some forgiveness in for those areas that maybe we're not that strong. And that's another thing that's really important, when we're working with partners.
Yeah, and another perk too of being self-reflective and open to your own blind spots. Well, a couple perks. One, it helps other people be more comfortable, uh, makes you more approachable and helps other people more comfortable, addressing your weaknesses, which ultimately makes you stronger, right?
Absolutely.
But it also helps you identify weaknesses in other people and their blind spots. For example, in our business, I noticed Vinny kind of has that martyr mentality as well in a different way. He does it for him, he's more in the weeds kind of person, but he'll just keep working and keep just, charging through every single task, even if it's not fair that he's doing the task. So he'll pick up the slack of other people's work without even realizing it. Just because that's, it's almost martyr-esque in a way of like, we'll just like, if we don't have a good employee, the solution is I need to manage them better versus this person shouldn't belong here. There was a tendency a little bit to kind of accept people's negligence more than we probably should have in the past. And so, but by me being self-reflective on that and understanding my own weakness in that realm of basically accepting more than I should, I could see that in other people such as Vinny doing, and
Absolutely.
it make it easier to address.
Absolutely.
Net
I'm
positive.
a big advocate of one, understanding what emotion is over behavior and understand the difference, and then a big advocate of identifying the emotions that are triggered in you, because when we can understand what's being triggered in ourselves, we can see it in others. And that's kind of what you're
Hmm.
talking about, is like we could start to see the
Exactly.
patterns we do. We can see the emotions that are triggered, and we can actually inquire and ask from a curiosity standpoint instead of be frustrated and try to fight it. um, so the next step, I would say, in really navigating uh, the the blind spots is to have those defined roles and responsibilities and boundaries, and start talking about what those are. And for me, when I say boundaries, it's not like, oh, you can't go there, but it's, what do we do when somebody crosses a boundary, and how do we let them know that, to have the discussion about, hey, I didn't like that when that happened, what was happening for you, and have a conversation around being able to understand. Because a lot of times when somebody crosses boundaries, whoa, a big flag, that is a blind spot somebody had. Because people don't really cross people's boundaries when they know about it. People don't go,
Generally.
you know what? I just want to upset that person. I just want to cause problems. People don't do that unless they got some real issue going on psychologically. People don't do that. And so, now, I will say, moment out of this discussion for a second, that people will blame people and say they got personality issues and mental health issues when they're not being treated the way they want to. And I'd say that's a blind spot for them when they're sitting there pointing out everybody as a narcissist, or everybody has some kind of anxiety or depression. Or when I start pointing the finger saying they got some problem, I better look at myself, especially the narcissist. You start calling people narcissists, you better look at yourself. Sorry, I'm just saying. But that's something that we really want to look at, is those defined roles and responsibilities, and who's doing what, and what does that look like, and what does done look like, and what does it look like, and how will you know to help me when I'm not doing it well, even if I think I'm doing it well. And that's a really good question to address with people. And so, how do I approach you when you're doing your thing you just said you had, when you don't think you're doing it?
Yeah.
Because the reality is if I'm making statements all of the time as questions, and I may have just done it there, I don't know, I think I did, but how does somebody approach me when I'm doing that, and it doesn't look like I'm approachable? Because another thing about me is I'm pretty confident in how I put things, and how I put information out there, and how I'm uh, pretty direct, as I've heard. Uh, People get nervous about confronting that, or asking me on, or inquiring, and it's like, no, just do it. If I get upset, then tell me that was weird, and I'll go, oh man, I better look at me, that was weird. But it's really knowing that you can approach people, and letting them know how to approach you. And so, I had to tell Michael in that situation how to approach me when I'm doing that, and say, hey, is that a question, or is that a direction that you want me to follow? Or do you realize that it sounded like you're really telling me that and you don't have the information to actually tell me that? Like, oh, and it can be funny when we start really being able to give permission and allow that kind of conversation. So how do you do that with that situation of giving people permission to call you on your shit?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I like to try and lead by example. I mean, one, we'll have a conversation about it, right? Like when and just from a business sense, when we're bringing somebody into the company, we're very forthright that this is a welcome place for constructive criticism. We respect each other, but we're direct, respect and direct. So it's like, we'll, we're not, nobody's going to call each other names, things like that, but we're going to be honest. Um, and I lead myself that way. I try to be that way. It's not always, it's something I've worked on over time. It's definitely not natural for me, but I've gotten more comfortable with it. Calling people on their shit if it needs to happen. You do it in a polite kind of way where they're not disparaged. But it, by doing that, right, is you set that precedent because if you're willing to do that to them, it makes it more, the grounds are more open for them to do it to you or, to others. So I try to roll with that, setting the expectations and then kind of rolling with that social modeling model of, practicing the behavior you want others to practice as well.
I like you said that because I have worked with parents with kids for years and years when I was a clinical psychologist and I was a child adolescent psychologist, working with parents trying to change behaviors in kids. And um, for years and years and years, we were taught that we got to implement change in the kid by telling them what to do and then holding them accountable to that and making them do that. And I stepped in and I was like, that doesn't work at all. It blows the kid up, which is okay, but it blows the kid up unnecessarily. And oftentimes it creates resentment in the kid because they feel coerced because that's what we're doing when we tell them that you have to behave this way and we'll give you a treat if you do it. And if you don't, we're also teaching them how work works. You get your treat, which is a paycheck if you actually do the work. And that's why people think it's okay. But the true behavior modification is what Kevin just said. What you just said, Kevin, is that I change my behavior in front of them for them to start taking the cue from me on how the behavior is supposed to be done. And when I change my behavior, oftentimes their behavior just starts to change and fall in line with what I was asking for in the first place. Um, and if anybody wants to check and try this out, I can tell you exactly how to check to see if this information is right. One, go into whoever you're closest to and start yelling at them and see if you get the result you want. And if that doesn't work, start asking them what you want to see and if they're willing to actually do that with you. That's the two things that are happening. And even if in behavior modification, the old way, you think that you're being nice, it feels like somebody telling you what to do. And so that's the idea. Am I inviting people to do something or am I telling them they have to? And if I'm telling them they have to, that's coercion because you have to, the next two words are or else. If I'm inviting, then they can or they don't have to. There might be an or else, but it's not implied and it's not pushed and it's not felt. And that's the big thing. The next thing that really helps us to build awareness and to make sure that we're on the right track around the idea of clear expectations. We talked about roles, responsibilities, boundaries. But the next thing that Christine and I really focus on and find it the most value is really set the track for your business on what your vision, what your mission, and what your behavioral values are so that everybody can refer back to those when we're off and say, hey, our vision is to be the best design and build company in on our block. is what we're doing right now serving that vision? Or our mission is to give people this beautiful space. Is what we're doing serving that mission? Or the values, the behaviors that we said we value are, being direct and respectful? When you called me that name, was that direct or respectful? And we can use those as really solid things to go back to whenever we start getting muddy, or when we start having problems in communication. We go right back to the vision and the value and the mission and go, are we doing that? And it's a very, very strong grounding way to get back on track easy. Thoughts? Because you guys went through that.
Yeah. Again, it goes back to setting those upfront expectations in an easy to understand way, um, and letting people decide if it gives the other person a fair shot to decide if that's the right place for them.
Right.
Um, so it's
And what,
important.
what Kevin's actually referring to is, we actually, when we help a company do their vision, value, mission, one of the things that we really want people to do is really start making sure that they use that in their hiring process to bring people in and say, this is what we're about. Are you on board or not? And
Mhm.
you notice how I'm using the bullet train kind of stuff underneath that? I just kind of noticed. And so, are you on board with what we're talking about? And so it starts to be the invitation to, this is how we run things. At the same time, it's also the anchor, or the solid. I'll go with the bullet trains, the solid tracks with which we run on too. We're not derailing by going off vision. If that thing that we just talked about is pulling off our vision, or pulling off of our mission, or outside of our values, then we got to get back on track. And we're inviting other people onto the track with us to go the way we want to go. And so the next thing I think about, once we have that clear expectations, and we have awareness of us, um, developing a way that we can actually confront. And so, how do we do that? And that's, how do you guys do that?
So for us, again, we try to get ahead of problems. So what we do in our company is we have regular feedback meetings, right? So uh, this is a structured way for folks. Yep. Hell yeah, super important, and it really helps. Even if it's a meeting where there's not really anything said, and we've had those where it's like, no, like things are good, and but it's a structured way and a platform for people to know that they're going to be heard. Um, and again, like maybe because a lot of times when um, before there was fire, there was smoke, and so we try to catch it when it's smoke because then it's much easier to keep from turning into a fire. And by having those regular meetings, for us, we do it quarterly. That works for us. We get ahead of it, and I think people feel heard. Well, I don't think I know. I've asked, during these meetings and things like that. People feel heard, and it's just it and it's standard practice, right? It removes an element of hoping that the other person has to come to you with an issue, right? Especially, and I'm speaking a little more as like the leader of a company, because sometimes that can be intimidating, um, you know, giving feedback up, so to speak, up the chain. So by
Right.
having those structured meetings, it allows folks to, on any level of the business to feel heard. And so, if it just it takes away that element of them having to put energy into bringing something to you. It's like, all right, you're here. So is there anything you'd like to talk about? So it's less willpower they have to exert, which is good.
Right.
It
Right.
encourages that behavior.
Right. And when we started setting up meetings with you guys, and how we do it with a lot of companies, is one of the major things. And I don't know if you still do this or not, but I suggested if you don't, is nobody's leaving this meeting without putting in their information, because if you're quiet, you disagree with what's going on. And
Mm,
so we have to hear where you're coming from in order to know that you're on board with what we're talking about. Because a lot of people do it the opposite way. And well, if you don't have anything to say, you must be happy.
right.
And that is the biggest way we allow a miscommunication to happen, is
That's
assuming that
yeah, you
they're
got to poke a little bit.
got to
You know,
poke.
like you want people to just if they're happy, you want to hear them say that and listen to how they're saying that, you know. But
Absolutely.
that's the I mean that's more in the weeds of it, um but yeah, there's strategies to get ahead of this, and it's much easier to operate a business if you can get ahead of any kind of resentment or personality issues. So much
Yeah.
easier.
And so, one of the last things that I want to kind of talk about really is some of the more interesting ways, and this might be what my friend Kevin was referring to weeds, but how do we actually do things? One, do this idea of poking the bear, or poking the blind spot. And first is, I like to really, I'm very confrontational, some people think, but I'm direct and I point out the elephants in the room, and I put my hand up and go, I'm not sure what's going on. And so I always frame it as, hey, we want to grow here. And so I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't bring this up. I wouldn't be doing my friends of service if I didn't bring it up. And I would leave the situation upset with myself because I didn't say something. And so the idea is really, number one, conflict is good because conflict actually breeds action out of that. And so a lot of people, like, we want to reframe it as not conflict. No, just be honest. It's freaking conflict. It's conflict, and
And
we're
it's
bringing it
okay.
up. It's
Yeah.
okay because we're not doing it from malice, and we're not doing it from negative intent, or trying to be mean. We're really, and when you said calling people on their shit, that's the short version of it. But really, what I like to point out, especially when I'm working with people on getting comfortable with conflict, once we're comfortable with it, we can say we're calling people on our shit. But what we're wanting to do is, we want to call them out on what they're doing good, and call attention, everybody's attention, to what they're doing good, and bring their personal attention to what they might not be doing good. And so bringing something to their attention and going, hey, is this what you're trying to do? Is this what you were going for here? Bringing it to their awareness versus calling them on their good stuff that they're doing. And so we have that reversed a lot of times. And a lot of times, and I don't know if you've ever seen it, Kev, in other businesses that you've been a part of, but for some reason, we're very quiet in congratulating people around stuff, and hey, you know what, you did a good job, very quietly. And then we go, hey, you screwed up, and bring everybody's attention to the screw up. We want to reverse that and make sure that everybody knows when somebody wins, and we want to make sure that we really come alongside of them. It's kind of like, hey, did you know you had your zipper down? We want to zip that thing up, right? And so I like to help people kind of understand the idea of, when we see something, we want to say something, but we want to treat it like, hey, did you know you got your zipper down? We want to probably not have that. And then when there's good stuff happen, hey, you look really good. Hey, that was amazing what you did right there. And so bringing confrontation into, hey, this is how we grow. This is how our business is going to succeed. And I want you to let me know if my zipper's down. And so this is what we're asking for. Please participate. And when we have that, we start to really see conflict as the major focus to help growth. A business that doesn't have any conflict is dead.
Conflict is good,
Absolutely.
even if it's not the result you want.
And so, the next thing is, when we're doing conflict, we're doing pretty good. Watch out for statements like, it's not a big deal, or We can deal with that later, because it might not be a big deal and we might be able to deal with it later. But if we just decide that before we talk about it, it might be a very, very big, explosive type of material that we should have addressed right then.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and what I'm talking about, what I call mining for conflict, is getting in there and going, what is that all about? You know, it could be as simple as somebody rolled their eyes in a meeting and like, what's going on there? Well, it's not that big a deal. We can deal with it later. Wait a minute. Maybe it is a big deal. Maybe they've heard it 15 times and we didn't know it, but we just saw that and we got to really dig in. And so, really identifying that instead of avoiding by going, it's not a big deal, deciding it's a big deal instead of weighing it out and talking about it. And making sure that people are heard and we want to hear from those people. And so, I like to say, really mining for conflict and making sure that we hear those more silent people, what they're thinking, because a lot of times those silent people have the best ideas.
Listen to the Johns.
Listen to the Johns. They got a team member named John that has just brilliant guy. Um, and then the real big one that I have a whole training around, and I'm sure that other people have trainings, but mine is better. The I's versus U's, and really understanding how to be much more productive in that confrontation and how to really diffuse before any kind of defensiveness happens, because defensiveness is really people just protecting themselves. And so if people are being defensive, it's because we actually attacked and didn't know it. And so learning how to use your I statements and learning how to stick to facts and learning how to mine for information is really important. And when we start doing that, we start to be able to uncover the blind spots and we start to really open people up to being communicative in the partnership. And that's where we really get going. And so we want to see people do that much better. We want to see people actually have that ability to be vulnerable and open up and admit when they're making mistakes, admit when they're having trouble, admit when they're feeling bad, admit when they're feeling whatever's going on, and be a part of the team. Because when we're doing that, we all grow together. And so, you know, we all have blind spots. And like Kevin said, they're blind spots because we can't see them. And so we need help from each other. And we got to also be honest about, hey, you know what? If you point out a blind spot, I might not be really happy about it. But because I'm in this team, I'm going to listen. And even if I have a bad reaction, please keep telling me, because I need to learn how to be okay with that too. It's like a thorn in me at that point, and you just tweak the thorn. And so continue to let me know and continue to have these conversations with your team. Closing ideas.
I think set expectations, be transparent, and don't be afraid of conflict.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the big thing for me is what Kevin said at the beginning, is really building awareness, self-awareness, and not being afraid of the conflict, like Kevin said. And how do you know if you're afraid of conflict? If you're saying things like, don't worry about it, or it's not that big a deal, or I'll get to it later, you may have some conflict avoidance going on. And you might want to look at that. And then communicate, communicate, communicate. The more we communicate, the better it is. And if you're in a business that you guys don't like the meetings, you better look at that, because meetings are the major place of communication. And it's almost like day-to-day work is practice. The meetings are the big game. And if you're not thinking it like that, start thinking it like that, because all good, positive growth in a company comes from strong meetings. So that's what I got to say. And thanks for listening. If you did, thanks for turning us off. If you did, because you're not our clients. And and Kevin, I will see you next week.
All right. Sounds like a plan.